What we are doing now is we are rebasing the JobSeeker payment, and that will lead to an increase of $50 per fortnight.
Raising the unemployment benefits was welcome. The amount was not.
This government has announced an increase of $3.50 per day. What we've got today represents a heartless betrayal of the millions of people who have been hit by unemployment.
Last year, a Senate inquiry determined the JobSeeker rate of $40 per day to be totally inadequate. Today's increase brings that figure up to $44.
That is, of course, not the only payment that people receive when they're on JobSeeker. There's Commonwealth rent assistance, there's energy supplements, there's a range of other payments.
But what his announcement has done today has created a culture that says, we don't care whether you've got enough. We don't care about whether or not it's hard for you already to try and get a job. We're just going to make it even harder.
Last year, JobSeeker supplements raised the unemployment rate to $1,115 per fortnight. It's been slashed repeatedly since then, and next month was set to drop to just $565. Today's increase will raise it to $615, almost exactly $300 below the poverty line.
We need to ensure that we have a system that is fair and sustainable for the people who need it and the taxpayers who pay for it.
Not substantial enough to get people through that have, still struggling throughout this tricky time, I guess.
It affects how much you can spend on groceries or weekly bills.
I think certainly needs to be increased a bit more.
One thing that has been increased a bit more, mutual obligations. Put on ice during the pandemic, they're back. And they're being ramped up with face-to-face job interviews, minimum job searches, mandatory training, a new career profile obligation, and a dob-in line.
If someone does apply for a job, they're offered the job and they're qualified for the job, but they say no, the employer will now be able to contact my department and report that person.
The government's been facing pressure from all sides to raise the rate, but will today's announcement put out the fire or fan the flames?
Well, Shane Wright is the economics correspondent for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, and he joins us now. Shane, we just heard from Anne Ruston saying the system needs to be fair for both the people who need it and the taxpayers who fund it. Do you think that's reasonable?
If you're running a $200 billion deficit and money's as cheap as chips, it's a bit hard to argue how fair you need to be to taxpayers when there's 1.5 to 2 million people who are getting by on the smell of an oily rag. It is a difficult decision. No government has touched this since Paul Keating's government actually increased it by a bit above inflation back in the mid-90s. So, yes, the government's recognised there's a problem, but they've probably fallen a fair way short of what a lot of people were hoping.
Yeah, what should the increase have been?
Look, we're talking at the moment, this proposal of $50 over a fortnight. Most experts had been looking for at least $50 a week. There was a survey of a lot of prominent economists late last year which found $100 a week would be doable and bring you up. You bring a lot of people out of poverty. And this is the thing that's happened where the COVID supplement came in. You actually saw people who have not been able to buy shoes, clothes, do repairs around the house. They were finally able to do that. And if that's not a respectable way to live, then I don't know what is.
Well, the PM made a point of calling out additional payments that can supplement JobSeeker. Did those end up adding up to a living wage?
Look, I reckon the members of early evening panel shows would have difficulty getting by on some of these payments. Like the Prime Minister mentioned the energy supplement, that's less than $10 a fortnight. That's not a lot of electricity to keep the lights out. The rent assistance, which goes to about 40% of JobSeeker recipients, not a majority of them, that works out about $70 a week. So think of that, say, if you're renting in Sydney or Melbourne or even the back blocks of Dubbo, you would still struggle to come up with, your wage is around $380 a week. That is still not a lot of money.
The the mutual obligation things are really interesting. The idea being you don't want to give people an incentive not to go out and look for a job properly. But at a time like this, with the job market the way it is, does it work? Does that make sense?
Well, you've still got unemployment at 6.6%. There's about 1 million people out of work. There's another 1 million who are underemployed, who want more hours. And even though job ads are lifting, there are still you've still got a shortage in that area of people who can do the work. So you're really still running into trouble by introducing those mutual obligations at a time when you've got unemployment still relatively high.
All right, Shane, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time.
Always a pleasure, guys.
From expert opinions to in-depth analysis and reporting, the Project YouTube brings you the biggest stories from Australia and around the globe. Hit the subscribe button now for news delivered straight to your feed.